The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, adjusted her pearl earrings one final time before the mirror. Today marked another significant royal engagement, but something felt different in the air. The usual buzz of anticipation that accompanied such events seemed heavier, more charged with an undercurrent of tension that had been building within the royal family for months. Catherine had always prided herself on being a peacekeeper within the Windsor clan. Since marrying Prince William over a decade ago, she had navigated the complex web of royal relationships with grace and diplomacy. However, recent events had tested even her considerable patience and tact. The ongoing drama surrounding various family members had created fractures that seemed to deepen with each passing day. The particular source of today's tension centered around Prince Charles, now King Charles III, and his relationship with his children and their spouses. Catherine had witnessed firsthand how the dynamics had shifted since Queen Elizabeth's passing. The weight of the crown had changed Charles in ways both subtle and profound, and his approach to family matters had become increasingly rigid and formal. Princess and the king's sister had always been known for her no-nonsense attitude and fierce loyalty to the monarchy. She was respected throughout the royal household for her work ethic and dedication to duty. However, those close to her knew that beneath her stoic exterior lay deep emotions and strong convictions about how the royal family should conduct itself, and had particular views about maintaining traditions and protocols that had served the monarchy for generations. The relationship between and Catherine had always been cordial but distant, and represented the old guard of the royal family, steeped in tradition and unwavering in her commitment to duty above all else. Catherine, while respectful of these traditions, brought a more modern perspective to her role. This difference in approach had created subtle tensions over the years, though both women had managed to maintain a professional relationship. The morning schedule included a private family meeting before the public engagement. These gatherings had become more frequent since Charles ascended the throne, as he sought to establish his vision for the monarchy's future. However, they had also become increasingly contentious as different family members expressed varying opinions about the direction the royal family should take. Catherine made her way through the castle's ornate corridors, her heels clicking softly against the polished floors. Staff members bowed respectfully as she passed, but she could sense an unusual tension among them as well. Palace staff had an uncanny ability to detect when storms were brewing within the royal family, and today felt particularly charged. The meeting was scheduled to take place in the Blue Drawing Room, a space that had witnessed countless family discussions over the years. As Catherine approached the room, she could hear voices through the heavy oak doors. Charles's voice was measured but firm, while Anne's responses carried her characteristic directness. William's voice occasionally joined the conversation, attempting to bridge differences as he often did. Taking a deep breath, Catherine knocked gently before entering. The room fell silent as she stepped inside, offering polite greetings to each family member present. Charles stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose that had become increasingly familiar since he became king, and sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her expression unreadable, but her posture suggesting she was prepared for battle. William offered Catherine a brief smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a sign that the conversation had already taken a difficult turn. Other family members were scattered around the room, each seeming to occupy their own space as if drawing invisible battle lines. Charles began the meeting by addressing recent media coverage and public perception of the royal family. His tone was diplomatic, but carried an underlying frustration about how certain family matters had been portrayed in the press. He spoke about the importance of maintaining unity and presenting a cohesive front to the public, especially during these early years of his reign, and listened intently, her fingers drumming silently against the arm of her chair. When Charles paused, she took the opportunity to express her own concerns about recent developments. Her voice was steady, but carried an edge that those familiar with her new indicated deep displeasure. The conversation gradually turned to specific incidents and decisions that had caused friction within the family. Charles outlined his vision for modernizing certain aspects of the monarchy while maintaining its essential character. He spoke about the need to adapt to changing times and public expectations, a theme that had become central to his approach as king. However, Anne's response revealed the depth of her concerns about these proposed changes. She spoke passionately about traditions that had served the monarchy well for centuries and questioned whether some of the proposed modifications were necessary or wise. Her words carried the weight of decades of royal service and a deep understanding of institutional history. Catherine found herself in an increasingly uncomfortable position as the discussion grew more heated. Both Charles and Anne made valid points, but their approaches seemed fundamentally incompatible. Charles advocated for evolution and adaptation, while Anne championed preservation and continuity. The tension in the room became palpable as other family members began to take sides or attempt to find middle ground. William tried to mediate, suggesting compromises that might address both perspectives. However, his efforts seemed to highlight rather than resolve the fundamental differences in philosophy. As the morning progressed, Catherine observed the dynamics with growing concern. She could see how deeply both Charles and Anne felt about their positions, and she understood that this wasn't simply about policy differences. This was about competing visions for the future of an institution that both had served their entire lives. The discussion eventually moved to specific examples where these philosophical differences had created practical problems. Charles cited instances where traditional approaches had proven inadequate for modern challenges, and provided counterexamples where departure from established protocols had caused confusion or controversy. Catherine recognized that her own position within the family gave her a unique perspective on these issues. As someone who had married into the royal family as an adult, she had experienced both the challenges of adapting to royal traditions and the benefits of bringing fresh perspectives to established practices. However, she also understood that her voice in these discussions carried particular weight precisely because of her outsider origins. Her opinions could be seen as either valuable fresh perspective or inappropriate interference, depending on how they were expressed and received. The conversation continued to escalate as various family members shared their views. Catherine noticed how Anne's composure began to show subtle signs of strain. The Princess Royal had always prided herself on maintaining emotional control, but the current discussion was touching on issues that went to the heart of her life's work and beliefs. Charles, meanwhile, seemed increasingly frustrated by what he perceived as resistance to necessary changes. His position as king gave him ultimate authority over royal family matters, but he clearly hoped for family unity rather than having to impose decisions unilaterally. As the morning wore on, Catherine found herself increasingly aware that a moment was approaching when she would need to speak. The dynamics in the room suggested that her perspective might be crucial in either bridging the growing divide or inadvertently making it worse. The weight of this responsibility settled on her shoulders as she considered her words carefully. Whatever she said next could have far-reaching consequences for family relationships and potentially for the monarchy itself. The room fell silent again as all eyes turned to her, waiting for her contribution to this pivotal family discussion. Catherine took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would be remembered and analyzed by everyone present. The morning sun had shifted, casting different shadows across the room, but the tension remained as thick as ever. In this moment of silence, she understood that she stood at a crossroads that would define not only her own role within the royal family, but potentially the future direction of the monarchy itself. Catherine felt the weight of expectation as she prepared to speak. The silence in the blue drawing room had become almost suffocating, with each family member waiting to hear her perspective on the heated debate between Charles and Anne. She had always been careful to choose her words thoughtfully in family discussions, understanding that her position as William's wife gave her significant influence, but also required delicate navigation of long-standing relationships and protocols. Drawing upon her years of experience within the royal family, Catherine began to speak with measured calm. She acknowledged the valid concerns raised by both Charles and recognizing the importance of both preserving cherished traditions and adapting to contemporary realities. Her initial words seemed to ease the tension slightly, as family members appreciated her diplomatic approach. However, as Catherine continued, she began to address more specific issues that had been sources of ongoing friction. She spoke about the challenges she had personally observed in balancing public expectations with family privacy. Her voice remained steady, but there was an underlying firmness that suggested she had given these matters considerable thought. Catherine's perspective carried particular weight because of her unique position within the family. Having entered the royal family through marriage, she understood both the outsider's view of royal life and the insider's reality of daily challenges. This dual perspective allowed her to see issues that others might miss or dismiss. As she continued speaking, Catherine touched upon recent incidents that had caused media controversy and public criticism. She spoke candidly about how certain decisions had been perceived by the public and the potential long-term consequences for the monarchy's reputation. Her words were respectful but direct, avoiding the diplomatic language that often obscured difficult truths in royal discussions. The room remained silent as Catherine shared her observations about public sentiment and changing social expectations. She spoke about conversations she had with people outside the royal bubble, ordinary citizens whose opinions rarely reached the ears of senior royals. These insights provided a perspective that was often missing from family deliberations. Catherine then addressed specific concerns about recent protocol changes and their implementation. She spoke about instances where good intentions had led to confusion or misunderstandings, both within the family and among palace staff. Her examples were concrete and well-documented, making her points difficult to dismiss. Princess Anne's expression had grown increasingly rigid as Catherine spoke. The Princess Royal had always been protective of established traditions and suspicious of changes that seemed to undermine institutional stability. Catherine's words, while respectful, were essentially supporting many of the modernization efforts that Anne viewed with deep concern. Charles, meanwhile, seemed pleased that Catherine was articulating perspectives that aligned with his own vision for the monarchy's evolution. However, he also appeared somewhat uncomfortable with the directness of her observations, particularly those that implicitly criticized recent decisions or their implementation. William watched the exchange with growing apprehension. He could see how Catherine's words were being received by different family members and recognized that her honesty, while admirable, was potentially creating new tensions even as it addressed existing ones. As Catherine reached the culmination of her remarks, she made a statement that would prove to be the catalyst for the emotional explosion that followed. Her words, intended to encourage unity and understanding, instead struck and as a fundamental challenge to everything she had dedicated her life to defending. Catherine spoke about the need for the royal family to acknowledge when traditional approaches weren't serving the monarchy's best interests. She suggested that loyalty to the institution sometimes required the courage to embrace change rather than simply defending established practices. Her tone remained respectful, but her message was unmistakably clear. The impact of these words on Princess Anne was immediate and profound. For decades, Anne had built her identity around unwavering service to the crown and absolute dedication to established protocols. She had sacrificed personal preferences and desires in service of what she believed the monarchy required. To hear Catherine suggest that such dedication might sometimes be misguided struck at the very core of Anne's sense of self and purpose. Anne's initial response was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Her hands, previously still, began to tremble slightly as she processed the implications of Catherine's statement. The other family members in the room could sense that something significant was happening, though they couldn't yet predict the full extent of Anne's reaction. When Anne finally spoke, her voice was barely controlled. She began by questioning Catherine's understanding of royal history and traditions. Her words were precise and cutting, delivered with the authority of someone who had spent her entire life within the royal family. She spoke about sacrifices that Catherine couldn't comprehend and responsibilities that went beyond public perception or modern convenience. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Anne's composure began to crack. Her criticism of Catherine became more pointed, touching on fundamental questions about loyalty, duty, and the true nature of royal service. She spoke about family members who had given everything for the crown and questioned whether newer members truly understood what such commitment required. Catherine found herself in an impossible position. She had spoken from genuine concern for the monarchy's welfare, but her words had triggered a response that went far beyond rational discussion of policies or procedures. Anne's reaction revealed deep wounds and frustrations that had been building for years, possibly decades. Charles attempted to intervene, recognizing that the situation was spiraling beyond normal family disagreement into something more dangerous. However, his efforts to calm and only seemed to intensify her emotional response. She turned on him as well, expressing frustrations about decisions and changes that she felt undermined everything their mother had worked to build. The other family members in the room watched in stunned silence as Anne's careful composure finally shattered completely. Years of suppressed emotions and unspoken concerns poured out in a torrent of words that revealed the depth of her frustration with the direction of the monarchy and her sense of isolation within her own family. William moved closer to Catherine, instinctively protective but also clearly struggling with divided loyalties. He understood Anne's perspective and respected her lifetime of service, but he also knew that Catherine's concerns were legitimate and her intentions honorable. Anne's emotional outburst included references to private family matters that had never been discussed openly. She spoke about feeling marginalized in family decisions despite her decades of experience and unwavering loyalty. Her words revealed a woman who had given everything to an institution she loved, but felt increasingly disconnected from its current direction. The intensity of Anne's reaction shocked everyone present. The Princess Royal had built her reputation on emotional control and professional demeanor. To see her in such a state was unprecedented and deeply unsettling for family members who had come to rely on her stability. Catherine remained silent during Anne's outburst, understanding that anything she said would likely make the situation worse. However, her expression revealed her distress at having triggered such a response. She had never intended to attack Anne's legacy or question her dedication, but her words had clearly been interpreted as doing exactly that. As Anne's emotional explosion continued, it became clear that this was about much more than disagreement over specific policies or procedures. This was about competing visions of duty, different understandings of loyalty, and fundamental questions about how the royal family should evolve in changing times. The room that had started the morning as a venue for family discussion had become a battlefield where decades of suppressed tensions finally erupted into the open. The consequences of this confrontation would extend far beyond the immediate participants, affecting relationships and dynamics throughout the royal family. Charles stood frozen, realizing that his attempt to bring the family together for constructive discussion had instead opened wounds that might prove difficult to heal. The monarchy he was trying to modernize suddenly seemed more fragile than ever, torn by internal conflicts that threatened its very foundation. The morning sun, which had earlier cast hopeful shadows across the room, now seemed harsh and unforgiving as it illuminated a family in crisis. What had begun as a routine family meeting had transformed into a moment that would define relationships and set the course for future interactions among the most prominent members of the British royal family. The aftermath of Princess Anne's emotional breakdown left the blue drawing room in a state of stunned silence that seemed to echo off the ornate walls. Catherine had witnessed many difficult family moments during her years as a royal, but nothing had prepared her for the raw intensity of Anne's reaction to her carefully considered words. The Princess Royal's usual composure had completely shattered, revealing vulnerabilities and frustrations that had been carefully hidden beneath decades of dutiful service. Charles stood motionless near the window, his face pale with shock and concern. As the reigning monarch, he was accustomed to making difficult decisions and managing complex situations, but watching his sister's emotional collapse presented challenges that went far beyond matters of state or protocol. The weight of his crown suddenly felt heavier as he grappled with the realization that his vision for modernizing the monarchy had created fractures within his own family that might prove irreparable. William moved instinctively toward Catherine, placing a protective hand on her shoulder while his eyes remained fixed on his aunt. The future king found himself caught between loyalty to his wife, who had spoken from genuine concern for the monarchy's welfare, and respect for Anne, whose lifetime of service had earned her a special place in his heart. The complexity of his position was evident in the tension that lined his features and the careful way he chose each movement. Catherine herself remained frozen in place, her mind racing as she processed the magnitude of what had just occurred. She replayed her words over and over, searching for ways she might have expressed her concerns differently. Her intentions had been pure, motivated by genuine love for the institution she had married into and deep respect for the responsibilities that came with her role. However, the devastating impact of her statement on and made her question whether good intentions were sufficient when dealing with such deeply held beliefs and emotions. The silence stretched on, broken only by Anne's labored breathing as she struggled to regain control of herself. The Princess Royal's hands shook visibly as she gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white with the effort of trying to compose herself. For a woman who had built her entire identity around emotional control and unwavering duty, this public display of vulnerability was perhaps more painful than the words that had triggered it. Other family members present seemed uncertain about how to respond to this unprecedented situation. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others stared at their hands or found sudden interest in the room's elaborate decorations. The normal protocols that governed royal family interactions provided no guidance for managing such an emotional crisis, leaving everyone to navigate uncharted territory. And finally, spoke again, her voice hoarse from emotion, but carrying a determination that suggested she was far from finished expressing her feelings. She addressed Catherine directly, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. She spoke about the sacrifices that royal service demanded, sacrifices that she felt Catherine couldn't fully understand despite her years within the family. The Princess Royal's words revealed the depth of her belief that royal duty required absolute submission to established traditions and protocols. She spoke passionately about family members who had given up personal happiness, romantic relationships, and individual ambitions in service of the crown. Her voice carried the pain of someone who had watched the institution she loved evolve in directions that challenged her fundamental understanding of what royal service meant. Catherine listened without interrupting, recognizing that and needed to express feelings that had apparently been building for years. However, she also began to understand that this confrontation was about much more than her specific comments. Anne's reaction revealed broader frustrations with changes that had been occurring throughout Charles's reign and, even earlier, during the final years of Queen Elizabeth's life. As Anne continued speaking, she referenced specific incidents and decisions that had troubled her. She spoke about protocol changes that seemed arbitrary to her, modernization efforts that she felt undermined royal dignity, and family decisions that had been made without consulting those with the most experience. Her words painted a picture of someone who felt increasingly isolated within an institution she had served faithfully for decades. Charles finally found his voice and attempted to address his sister's concerns. He spoke about the challenges of maintaining relevance in a rapidly changing world while preserving the monarchy's essential character. His words were measured and thoughtful, reflecting the careful consideration he had given to these issues throughout his long preparation for kingship. However, Charles's rational explanations seemed only to intensify Anne's emotional response. She challenged his assumptions about what the public wanted from the royal family and questioned whether the changes he championed truly served the monarchy's long-term interests. Her arguments were informed by decades of public service and interactions with people from all walks of life. The conversation gradually revealed fundamental philosophical differences that went to the heart of what it meant to be royal in the modern era, and represented a view that royal service required complete subordination of personal preferences to institutional needs, while Catherine and others advocated for approaches that balanced tradition with contemporary realities. William attempted to find common ground between these perspectives, suggesting that both tradition and evolution had important roles to play in the monarchy's future. His diplomatic efforts reflected his training as heir to the throne and his natural inclination to seek harmony within the family. However, his words seemed to highlight rather than resolve the fundamental tensions that had erupted. The emotional intensity of the situation began to take its toll on everyone present. What had started as a family meeting to discuss important issues had become an exhausting confrontation that left participants drained and uncertain about how to move forward. The normal rhythms of royal life seemed suspended as family members grappled with unprecedented emotional territory. Catherine found herself reflecting on her journey from ordinary citizen to royal family member. She thought about the lessons she had learned about duty, service, and sacrifice during her years of preparation for her current role. These memories helped her understand Anne's perspective while also reinforcing her belief that the monarchy needed thoughtful evolution to remain relevant and effective. The conversation eventually turned to specific examples of how different approaches to royal duty had produced different outcomes, and cited instances where strict adherence to protocol had preserved royal dignity and public confidence, while Catherine offered examples of situations where flexibility and adaptation had better served the monarchy's interests. These exchanges revealed the complexity of royal decision-making and the difficulty of determining which approaches would best serve the institution's long-term welfare. Both women could point to evidence supporting their perspectives, making resolution even more challenging. As the discussion continued, it became increasingly clear that this confrontation was part of a larger struggle within the royal family about its future direction. The emotions that had erupted were symptoms of deeper tensions that had been building as different generations and perspectives competed for influence over institutional policies and practices. The family members present began to recognize that resolving these issues would require more than a single conversation, no matter how intense or emotional. The fundamental questions being raised about duty, tradition, and modernization would need ongoing attention and careful navigation to prevent further family divisions. Charles eventually called for a temporary halt to the discussion, recognizing that emotions were too raw for productive dialogue. His decision reflected wisdom gained through years of managing difficult situations, but it also acknowledged that some problems couldn't be solved through immediate action or good intentions. As family members began to disperse, the atmosphere in the room remained heavy with unresolved tension. The emotional wounds that had been opened would require time and careful attention to heal, and there was no guarantee that complete reconciliation would be possible. Catherine remained behind for a few moments, looking around the room where so much family history had unfolded. She understood that this morning had marked a turning point in royal family dynamics, with consequences that would ripple through their relationships for years to come. The responsibility she felt for triggering these events weighed heavily on her shoulders, even as she remained convinced that difficult conversations were necessary for the monarchy's health. In the weeks following the explosive confrontation in the Blue Drawing Room, the royal family found itself navigating an unprecedented period of internal tension and careful diplomatic maneuvering. The emotional wounds that had been opened during that fateful morning meeting required delicate handling, as family members struggled to maintain their public duties while processing the private turmoil that had erupted within their ranks. Catherine threw herself into her royal responsibilities with renewed determination, but those closest to her could see the emotional toll the incident had taken. She questioned her words and their impact countless times, seeking guidance from William and trusted advisors about how to move forward constructively. The weight of knowing she had triggered such pain in and troubled her deeply, despite her conviction that the underlying issues needed to be addressed. The Princess of Wales began reaching out to, and through carefully crafted messages and gestures of respect and reconciliation, she arranged for flowers from her personal garden to be delivered to Anne's residence, accompanied by handwritten notes that acknowledged the Princess Royal's decades of devoted service. These overtures were made quietly, without fanfare or media attention, reflecting Catherine's understanding that healing would require private rather than public gestures. Princess Anne's response to these peace offerings was complex and varied. Some days brought acknowledgement and tentative warmth, while others seemed to reinforce the distance that had opened between them. Anne was clearly struggling with her own emotions and the implications of her very public loss of control. For someone who had built her identity around emotional discipline and unwavering duty, the breakdown represented a crisis that went beyond simple family disagreement. The Princess Royal began spending more time at her country estate, away from the intensity of royal life at Windsor and Buckingham Palace. Those close to her reported that she was engaging in deep reflection about her role within the changing monarchy and her relationship with family members who seemed to represent different values and approaches to royal service. Charles found himself in an increasingly difficult position as both brother and king. He was deeply concerned about Anne's emotional state, while also grappling with the broader implications of the family tensions for the monarchy's stability. His attempts to mediate between different perspectives required careful balancing of personal relationships with institutional needs. The king arranged for private meetings with Anne, during which they discussed not only the immediate crisis, but also her broader concerns about the monarchy's direction. These conversations revealed the depth of Anne's feelings about changes she had witnessed over recent years. Charles listened carefully to her perspectives while also explaining his vision for the crown's future and the reasoning behind difficult decisions he had made. These discussions between siblings were sometimes heated and always emotional, but they gradually began to build understanding, if not complete agreement. Anne's concerns were taken seriously and addressed thoughtfully, while Charles's explanations helped her understand the complex pressures and considerations that informed his decisions as monarch. William played an increasingly important role as mediator and bridge builder within the family. His position as heir to the throne gave him unique standing to address both Anne's concerns and Catherine's perspectives. He spent considerable time with his aunt, listening to her stories about royal service and learning from her vast experience, while also gently advocating for Catherine's genuine commitment to the monarchy's welfare. The future king's diplomatic efforts were crucial in preventing the family rift from becoming permanent. His respect for Anne's service and understanding of her perspective helped rebuild trust, while his support for Catherine demonstrated family unity despite disagreements about specific issues. Media speculation about royal family tensions inevitably began to surface, though the specific details of the confrontation remained private. Royal correspondents noted subtle changes in family dynamics during public appearances and commented on the reduced frequency of joint engagements between certain family members. However, the family's skill at maintaining public composure meant that the full extent of their internal struggles remained hidden from public view. Catherine and Anne's first public appearance together following the incident was carefully choreographed to demonstrate family unity while avoiding situations that might create additional tension. The event was a charity engagement focused on causes that both women supported, allowing them to showcase their shared commitment to public service despite their personal differences. The interaction between Catherine and during this engagement was watched carefully by observers, though most saw only the polished professionalism that both women had mastered over years of royal service. However, those with keen eyes noticed subtle signs of the ongoing tension, including carefully maintained physical distance and formal rather than warm exchanges. Behind the scenes, both women were making genuine efforts to rebuild their relationship on new foundations, and began to acknowledge that Catherine's concerns about modernization came from genuine love for the monarchy rather than disrespect for tradition. Catherine, meanwhile, gained deeper appreciation for the sacrifices that Anne's generation had made and the wisdom embedded in many traditional approaches to royal service. The process of reconciliation was slow and sometimes painful, requiring both women to examine their own assumptions and prejudices. Catherine came to understand that her outsider perspective, while valuable, sometimes failed to appreciate the historical context that informed long-standing practices, and gradually recognized that change, carefully managed, could strengthen rather than weaken the monarchy's foundations. Their healing relationship became a model for broader family reconciliation efforts. Other family members who had been affected by the tensions began to engage in their own conversations about duty, tradition, and change. These discussions were often difficult, but ultimately strengthened family bonds by allowing previously unspoken concerns to be addressed openly. Charles's leadership during this period proved crucial to the family's eventual healing. His willingness to listen to dissenting perspectives while maintaining his vision for the monarchy's future demonstrated the kind of thoughtful leadership that the institution required. His patience with Anne's emotional journey and support for Catherine's integration into the family helped prevent permanent divisions. The incident also led to changes in how family meetings were conducted, with greater attention to ensuring all perspectives were heard and respected. New protocols were established for discussing sensitive topics, including advanced preparation and follow-up conversations to address concerns that might arise. As months passed, the acute crisis gradually transformed into opportunities for deeper understanding and stronger relationships. Catherine and began collaborating on projects that combined traditional royal values with modern approaches to public service. Their joint efforts demonstrated that apparent contradictions between tradition and innovation could be resolved through creative thinking and mutual respect. The broader royal family learned valuable lessons about communication, respect, and the importance of addressing tensions before they exploded into crisis. The incident, while painful, ultimately strengthened the monarchy by forcing difficult conversations and deeper understanding among its key members. Princess Anne's emotional journey during this period revealed her fundamental humanity beneath the royal protocol and formal duties. Family members gained new appreciation for the personal costs of lifelong royal service and the emotional resilience required to maintain public composure while dealing with private struggles. Catherine's growth during this challenging period demonstrated her deepening commitment to her role and her increasing skill at navigating complex family dynamics. Her willingness to reflect on her own actions while maintaining her core convictions earned respect from family members who had initially questioned her perspective. The resolution of this family crisis reinforced the monarchy's ability to adapt and evolve while maintaining its essential character. The institution that emerged from this trial was stronger, more self-aware, and better equipped to handle future challenges through improved communication and deeper mutual understanding. Years later, both Catherine and would reflect on this difficult period as a turning point that deepened their relationship and strengthened the royal family as a whole. The pain of the initial confrontation had been transformed into wisdom and resilience that served them well in subsequent challenges they faced together as devoted servants of the crown.